it's going to be awesome. So thank you so much, Jan, for being here.
Very happy.
I think we're all good here. Give me thumbs up.
All right, so those of you in the front row, I am taking my mask off. I'm vaccinated, whatever. But if it makes you nervous and you want to run to the back, I will not be offended. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here. My name is Jan McGowan. I'm an interpretive naturalist. Can everyone hear me okay? If at any time you're having trouble hearing, please let me know, okay? I'm currently employed by the St. Joseph County Parks in the St. Joseph area, but I've been living in Angola for the last 3 years, and I've had the privilege of seeing a lot of Sandhill Cranes up where I live in Sandhill County. So what I'm going to do is I want to talk to you about cranes generally, because they're a worldwide bird, and they've influenced our cultures in ways maybe we don't even appreciate. I'll talk to you a little bit about the whooping crane, because in Indiana, we do have a fighting chance of seeing one. And then I'll spend most of my time talking about the Sandhill Crane. I understand that for last year, for the first time, there were Sandhill Cranes hanging out on the property of Eagle Marsh. Is that correct? Who heard or saw them?
They've been there before.
They've been there before. Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad they're back, and hopefully they're back every year and perhaps produce. So, first, I got to get the technology to work.
What is technology?
All right, this works too, or maybe not. All right, well, I'll tap dance while we're waiting.
Okay, try again.
All right.
There we go.
Give her a round of applause. These young people, they get it. All right, so cranes are found worldwide, pretty much every continent except Antarctica. And they're what we call charismatic avifauna. Basically, that means they're birds that get our attention. And for good reason. They're large, they're loud, and they're very sociable, kind of like people. Also, they have a lot of behaviors that have inspired human culture. First of all, cranes dance. There are indigenous dances in North America, Australia, and Asia that have been inspired by crane dances. Cranes are very watchful. There is some Christian lore that upholds the crane as an example of how we should be wary of sin. Cranes are long-lived, well, can be long-lived, and tend to mate for life. Some cultures, particularly in Asia, see the crane as a symbol of longevity, faithfulness, and love. And cranes migrate, often in big, noisy flocks. And there are stories, particularly in some indigenous peoples in North America, which credit the cranes for bringing the season. Our language has been influenced by cranes. I do not speak ancient Roman.
You don't.
I don't. But the word "groi," or however they say it, is supposed that was how they referred to cranes, and it is presumed it's because of the grunting sounds that cranes make. After the Normans conquered England, apparently genealogy became important. Who was related to who? And they made genealogical charts, which apparently resembled a crane's foot. French, pied de groi, gives us our word pedigree. In the word in English, congruence means consent or agree. And this term hoodwink, we all heard this term.
Yeah, we've all heard that one.
We've probably been so at one time or another. That derives from an old practice of sewing cranes' eyes shut so that they can be tamed and fattened up for the pots. Apparently, they taste really good. I don't like that term because I picture what that would be. Also, it is said that the Greek alphabet, the letters formed in the Greek alphabet, have been inspired by the shapes that crane flocks make while migrating. Now, scholars have debated this, and there's general agreement that at least 3 Greek letters may have come to use because of the formations of migrating cranes. So pull out your old, anybody study Greek alphabet? This would be one. What would they have called this in the Greek alphabet? It's upside down B. Lambda. That's okay. I don't remember my Greek letters. Lambda. And of course, now we call this capital A, but this would have been an alpha. And then we call this capital Y now, but upsilon. So past the Greek letters on fraternity houses, and a few of them might have crane flock shapes on them. So it's kind of interesting to think how they may have influenced even the names we now have. Okay, so cranes in North America. We have two species of crane in North America. We have the Sandhill Crane here, by far our most common crane. And we have here the whooping crane, by far our most rare. I'm going to start a little bit by talking about the whooping crane. It's got an interesting history in our nation. First of all, it is North America's tallest bird. It stands at 5 feet tall, so they're right eye to eye. It weighs about 15 to 17 pounds, and it has a wingspan of 7.5 feet. Can I borrow a helper? Maybe would you hold this string? So here I have a string representing the wingspan of a whooping crane. Wow. It rivals the wingspan of a bald eagle. I don't know if you can see, it's mostly a white rope, but on the ends here, I colored it black. When the birds are flying, their primaries, the outer feathers of their wings are black in color. So if you see a really large bird flying and it has black on the ends, I'm not guaranteeing you it's a whooping crane, but it's not a swan. Okay. It's not a swan. And so if someone says, look at that swan, you can knowledgeably say, no, it isn't, and then run away, because it could also be a couple other things. Now, it is the rarest crane in the world and one of the rarest birds in North America. We have just over 800 whooping cranes in the world. And I don't know if you can, oops, this number down here, 136, represents how many cranes there are in captivity. So in the wild, we don't even have 700. The two numbers I like to focus on here are 506 and 81. We've got two migratory flocks in North America. One has 506 birds and one has 81. So yeah, it is a disturbingly low number, but it is believed that at least since Europeans came to North America, they haven't really been that numerous. Even at the time that Europeans came, there may have only been as many as 2,000 birds in North America. Unfortunately, their rarity became their peril as our culture progressed and more people were finding ways to profit from natural resources in our nation. One of the things that happened, especially in the 1800s into the early 1900s, was people said, ooh, there's not many of those whooping cranes. If I shoot one and stuff it, I can sell it for a lot of money to a museum. Or if I take the eggs, I can sell it to a museum. So between unchecked hunting, unchecked collecting, and habitat destruction, by 1940, anybody know how few cranes we had here, whooping cranes? Fewer than 20. Wow. Yeah, they were almost gone. So, and that's not much for a gene pool, is it? But fortunately, over time, those numbers have slowly come up because of some protection. So this is the range map of the whooping crane. Here we have the habitat occupied by that group that has about 500 birds in it. They call it the Aransas wood buffalo population. Aransas referring to a national wildlife refuge down here where they winter and they are protected. And way up here, Wood Buffalo National Park in Canada is where they breed. And of course, then they migrate between. So that's come up from 20 birds in 1940. So obviously it's increased, not crazy fast, but it has. I don't know how many whooping cranes there were in the 1970s, certainly much fewer than 500. But in the 1970s, scientists got to thinking, we don't have a lot of whooping cranes. There was one flock. All it could take is one natural disaster or one disease to wipe these birds out entirely. So they hatched, pun intended, a plan to start an eastern migratory flock. And their first plan was to take eggs from captive whooping cranes, place them in the nest of nesting migratory sandhill cranes, and then the sandhill cranes would raise them. Cranes teach their young how to migrate. So the theory was the hoopers would grow up with the sandhills would teach them how to migrate, and then we get a migratory population of whooping cranes. One of that theory, the whooping cranes imprinted on the sandhills And when they grew up, they thought they were sandhills and were not interested in mating with other hoopers.
No, geez, okay.
Strike one,
Strike
yeah.
one, yeah.
No, they couldn't. Yeah, they couldn't successfully. I don't know if they tried, but yeah, they don't hybridize. So, which is probably good. We don't need to be sullying genetic populations either unnaturally. So, in the early 2000s, about 2001, the International Crane Foundation started a new plan up here near Baraboo, Wisconsin. They would hand raise whooping cranes. Now, of course, we don't want baby hoopers to imprint on people. You know, you don't want a hooper following you around all day. And we don't want them to feel comfortable around people because some people are not their friend. So they did hand raise these birds, but they made sure that these birds never saw a human form. And the way they did this, now this is serious science now, they wore costumes.
Oh, God, interesting.
From the time of hatching to the time of fledging, the only humans these birds saw were in costumes. You can see the little, here's the beak and head side, and here's the wing side. Yes, serious science. I can't imagine what it must be like romping through the wetlands in a costume with a crane. But here you go. The other part of making sure that they're able to teach these birds to migrate was to imprint them on sound. So these birds never heard a human voice. And even before they hatched, they were playing two sounds for these birds. One was the sound of mature whooping cranes. That's the sound they want them to imprint on and to learn how to vocalize. The other was an ultralight plane. As you probably know, humans in costume cannot fly. And so in order to teach these hoopers how to migrate, the costume scientists at fledging and migration time got in the ultralight, fired it up. They were imprinted to the sound and they followed these ultralight planes on the migration route to northern Florida.
That's cool.
All right, pretty cool. It is cool. And the nice thing about cranes is you only have to tell them once. They could even find their way back. All right. So this whole, they're still hand rearing and very carefully watching the genetics of the birds that they're hand rearing. They're still hand rearing birds up in Wisconsin, but the ultralight program stopped in 2015. Now we've got enough of a migratory flock that other birds, you know, like the hatchlings in the first years are learning to migrate from other birds. Right now, as of February 1st, this map shows where some of these birds are. There's about 17 wild hatched whooping cranes now. The rest were raised up in Baraboo by costume scientists. But of course, they keep very close track of which birds, which year, how they're doing, where they're going. I don't think all of them made it down to Florida this year. They have migrated down some. And then we've had them as far down as Florida and as far north as Indiana here. They don't, it's not common, but occasionally, once or twice, they've been seen at Jasper Pulaski Fish and Wildlife Area. I'll talk to you more about that place in a minute. So I don't know how much they've moved since February 1st, but that gives you an idea of about where they might be. And so look at that. We got a fighting chance of seeing them in Indiana, which is pretty exciting. This part of the state is a little more off what we'd be aiming for, you know, for Wisconsin, but as numbers grow, you never know. And you guys own cars, you know, maybe you can take a trip. If you do see one, sure, brag to all your friends, tell your friends, don't post it publicly exactly where you saw it. All right, because they are so vigorously protected, and there are still some people we don't trust out there. Occasionally, they've been shot either on purpose or by accident, which is a horrible crime. And you know, you never know what wacko just wants to cause trouble. So take a picture, tell your friends, say, "Oh, somewhere in this area," but don't post it the location on social media. All right, Sandhill Cranes. These are the birds of the day. These are the birds, of course, that we've had at Eagle Marsh and elsewhere. This range map shows, generally speaking, the birds don't read the range map. So, but generally speaking, this is the rule of thumb. This orange areas you see here are places where they breed, where they're going to be during the breeding season, where they. So you can see northern Indiana is on the lower end of that. North is, there's more of them. All right. Then the blue areas and or purple are where they're going to be during the non-breeding season, after migration stops. We've got 3 populations of migratory birds and 3 populations of non-migratory. By the way, the yellow is where you can see them during migration. So the non-migratory birds are represented by the purple here. They're very small populations. Some of them are endangered. We have 3 migratory populations of sandhill cranes: the lesser sandhill crane, the greater sandhill crane, and the Canadian sandhill crane. 85% of all North America's sandhill cranes are lesser sandhill cranes, and they're found west of the Mississippi River. These are the birds that so famously collect in Nebraska in the spring migration. I'll talk about that a little bit later. About 5% of the migratory birds, or less, are the Canadian sandhill cranes, and they kind of intersperse. We have the greater sandhill cranes, generally speaking, east of the Mississippi River. These darker areas here, you see the darker reddish and the darker blue, these represent staging areas. When cranes migrate, they don't just take off and go. They migrate in easy stages. So we've got a lot of birds coming from way up here. They'll work their way down, and then all of the birds will collect in staging areas at the lower part of that summer range, at that breeding range, particularly the greater sandhill cranes. And they'll kind of collect in bigger and bigger and bigger groups and fatten up and hang out there for a month or 2. And then when it's time to go, they all migrate generally together or in very large groups. So this is the group, this is the staging areas for the end of the breeding season. And we have a very famous staging area here in Indiana, which I'll talk about later. And then this is a very famous staging area for the lesser sandhill cranes as they come north. Okay, oh, and the greater sandhill cranes, our sandhill cranes, tend to be found in Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, southeast Minnesota, and southeast Ontario. Now, what's the difference? There's actually a pretty significant difference. Lesser sandhill cranes are between 6 and 7 pounds. Greater sandhills, almost twice that weight, 10 to 14 pounds. Greater sandhill cranes are a good foot taller than the lesser sandhills. You can see 4.5 to 5 feet tall for the graders. So I could almost stare one in the eye. Lessers are about 3.5 feet. And the wingspan, still pretty sizable. The lesser is a wingspan of 5 feet, and the greater sandhill of over 6 feet. This photo actually shows both species. So you can kind of see the size difference. And at first, when I looked at this picture, I thought, well, these birds are way up in front. And that's why they look bigger. But if I look where the legs are, they're really not that far up in front. They're just that much bigger, right? Can these birds, since they're subspecies or races of a species, yes, they can hybridize. So sometimes you get in between because you might have a lesser and a greater mating together. They can live to be 30 years of age, but nature is not easy. Nature is not always nice. Most do not. So there we go. Okay, so some people get confused, especially people who are really not familiar with birds at all, or are not familiar with cranes. They get confused between a crane and a heron. Or maybe when they're standing on the ground, you're fine, but when they're in flight, it might be more difficult. So the way to tell a heron and a crane apart in flight is when cranes fly, their long legs trail behind, and their necks are stretched way out in front. So between their legs, their neck, and their wings, they kind of make a cross shape. C for crane, C for cross. The heron has those nice long legs that trail, but its neck is folded in, not stretched out like that. So that's one way to tell them apart. The way they fly is another way. There's the way that herons fly. They just have this nice, relaxed sound they do. Cranes tend to do a shorter flick flap thing, and they're a lot noisier. Okay, so that's one way. On the ground, you can see that the sandhill crane tends to be very gray, sometimes a rust color. We'll talk about that in a minute, with that red patch on the head. Great blue heron, also gray, very yellow bill, and sort of black on the head. Also, herons tend to forage almost exclusively in wetlands. You can see cranes in wetlands, but also in drier areas like fields. I'd like to introduce you, if you have not yet met him, Aldo Leopold. He is considered one of our early and famous conservationists. He died in 1948. He is famous for writing, after a long career, he's famous for writing the Sands County Almanac. Has anybody read this? Yeah. If you haven't, I encourage you to pick it up. It is a series of essays, brilliantly and poetically written, depicting the ecology and interrelationships of the land and the organisms on his reclaimed farm in Wisconsin. He died in 1948 in an accident. He died of a heart attack fighting fire. So he was not an old man, but he died just after this was published. One of his essays is called Marshland Elegy, and he's writing of the Sandhill Crane. The last crane will trumpet his farewell and spiral skyward from the great marsh. And then a silence, never to be broken, unless perchance in some far pasture of the Milky Way. Sounds like he expected these things to disappear from the earth, doesn't it? And he had a legitimate reason to fear that. He died in 1948. By 1940, thanks to unchecked hunting, wetland drainage, and other habitat destruction, we had only 1,000 Sandhill Cranes left in all of North America. They were disappearing. It's sad that he didn't get to live long enough to see how many we've got now. They were extirpated as breeding birds. Extirpated meaning that they had been there and then they were no longer. Illinois, the last breeding pair, at least before they're back, was 1890. In Iowa, 1905. Ohio and Indiana held on longer. We've got a little more wetlands, of course, especially in this area. Our last breeding pair of Sandhill Cranes was 1929. We did not, once again, see a breeding pair of Sandhill Cranes in Indiana until 1982. And it was in Steuben County, up in the area of Pokagon State Park and Trent State Recreation Area, where there are several breeding pairs there every year now. Okay, so we can see hunting regulations, conservation measures matter. Okay, because by the mid-1980s, even the eastern population, the 15% of migrating cranes that live in our area, there were 16,000 of them. And now we've got 80 to 100,000 birds just in our eastern population alone. There are over 700,000 lesser Sandhill Cranes on the other side. All right, so they are definitely back and they are definitely numerous. And in some states, they are a game bird again. Okay, with regulations, of course. I have heard they're delicious. I've heard people call them the ribeye of the sky.
Okay.
I haven't tried one.
You haven't tried one? Okay.
No. And I shall not hoodwink one either. So I'm not kidding you. One of the most exciting moments of the year for me happens in mid to late February. You know, it's still winter out, still looks like it, but I step outside. Typically it's on a still or sunny day. And I have to do this on my phone because the sound, my phone, there it is. The sound isn't feeding through the PowerPoint. So I hear, that up in the sky, and I just go, oh, and I look up, and I find these birds. It might be a half dozen in a V. It could be a couple dozen in a V, or maybe if it's warm enough, they're spiraling on a thermal. And I get so thrilled because I know spring's really coming. And my whole family gets a bunch of things. Now it goes. So how do they make this noise? Well, it's all because of this trachea that they have. Now, our trachea is our windpipe. When we take a deep breath, we feel that cool air going down our chest, and it meets after about 4 inches, it meets up with our lungs, fills our lungs, and when we talk, we send it the other way through the trachea. Sandhill Cranes have a very long trachea. Now, of course, you might figure, you like my baby, my stuffed crane.
Yeah, those are cute.
Yeah, you might figure, okay, it's going to be a longer trachea than a human's because it's got this long neck. This does not account for the whole length of the trachea because the crane's neck or trachea is about 26 inches long. It literally comes down the neck and then has to wind around a few times inside the sternum before it meets up with the lungs. This big sternum enables them to make this big, loud, rattling call. And what they say, the larger the sternum, the louder the call. So I'm assuming, I have not done a comparative study, but I'm assuming greater Sandhill Cranes might be a little louder than lesser Sandhill Cranes. But I can tell you from experience, lessers are pretty loud too. Now, cranes do have a very sophisticated communication system. They call, of course, to warn of danger, to warn everybody else. They also call back and forth with their family members to keep track of each other. So especially in a large flock, if they're migrating, you hear a lot of vocalizing, and that's a lot of times that's them keeping track of each other. You'll hear that rattle from the adults. Up until a young one is about a year old, it makes sort of a chirp noise. So if you're listening to a group go by and you hear, rattle, 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 and a chirp, that's a first year. Now, another sound that they're very famous for is called the unison call. Now, this is done between a mated pair. The male makes a single sound, the female makes a quick double sound, and they do this in rapid succession. You can hear it for over a mile away, so perhaps you've heard it echoing through Eagle Marsh. This serves a couple purposes. At any time of the year, it can reinforce the pair bond between the two, like, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. Okay, that's into more buzzing, but it's almost Valentine's Day. But also, it is said that the unison calls, as they're getting ready to breed, gets their bodies into synchronicity for breeding, so that she's got eggs ready for fertilization when he's ready to fertilize. That's pretty cool. So let me play you the unison calls. So that's pretty unmistakable. When you hear it, I've been to Pokagon State Park a number of times and heard that coming, not even from very close by. You can hear it from pretty far. So, question is, why do they migrate? Same reason anything else migrate. It's expensive to migrate. You know how it costs us money to get on an airplane and fly and rent a car and get it lodging? Well, it's expensive for birds too. It takes a lot of energy and it does take risk. They never know for sure. Is the next place I'm going to go, is there going to be a good food supply? Will there be a predator? Will there be enough food to power me to where I'm going? But cranes, at least for a couple months, have a hard time foraging in the northern Indiana is getting a little easier, but they forage on the ground. They eat a lot of plant matter. They eat tubers, they eat vegetation, they like young shoots, they'll eat seeds. They will also supplement their diet with proteins like insects, worms, snakes, eggs, salamanders, and the like. Outside today, it'd be really hard for a crane to forage, wouldn't it? All right, so it'd be hard, and they need food energy every day to make enough body heat to not freeze. So when birds migrate, it's for feeding. Then, after the danger has passed, and that's different for all different kinds of birds. Early on for Sandhill Cranes, then they will start to work their way back because, of course, now they are going to need space and territory for breeding. So the reason for migrating is feeding and breeding, not because we want to suntan and feel nice and warm, although, So here's a migrating flock. Can't really hear it. There's sound, but that's on my video. Is there a way to make it any noisier at all? Yeah, that's about as noisy as it gets. Okay. And actually, look at that. They're spelling a letter for you. So this is actually near one of those staging areas. So there's some large flocks in there. Okay, so 2 to 4 weeks before a pair starts breeding, they arrive on their nesting ground. They tend to come back to exactly or very near the same place every year. And you can see this pair here, they have just returned. I was really lucky. I have a friend who is on the front of Pokagon with me. He likes to take pictures. And he's taken pictures of Sandhill Cranes all throughout the year, just up at Pokagon, with a timestamp on it. So I know for sure when these photos were taken and what's going on. This was shortly after they returned from migrating. They still have a colt in tow. So this is last year's colt. By the way, baby cranes are called colts. I tend to say male and female for the adults. Officially, the males are roans and the females are mares. Hope you get that in a trivia game. Okay. So either way, sometimes the colts leave the family during the migration, but sometimes they make it to the nesting grounds with mom and dad. Mom and dad don't let them stay long. I actually watched a pair of cranes like try to shake off. Yeah, I was in the babies going, but mom and dad, they're like, get out. They really were. It was kind of sad, but it was kind of funny. But what these do, first of all, you can tell that this is a colt just visually by looking at its head. You can see it's got like fuzzy down on its head, whereas the parents have a completely red patch on their head. This is actually a bald patch that is highly vascularized. This is skin, not feathers. And as this colt ages, first, second, and third year, the downy feathers will recede to reveal that skin patch. And that skin patch is complete at about their third year, which is the first year they might be able to reproduce. So what the colts do when they're chased out of their home is they find, it kind of reminds me of people like teenagers and 20-year-olds. They go find a non-breeding flock of birds. And they all hang out together for mutual protection, but also, you know, to look for a mate. And so from what I've read, colts will kind of try out a pair bond and, well, that's not working, I'll try this one. And by the end of their second summer, most of them have established a pair bond. Okay. Then after that, the next season they may nest, but some cranes don't nest until as late as their 7th year. But they can start nesting as early as their 3rd. So here we have a crane on a nest. When the pair starts building a nest, they work together. It takes about a week. They use vegetation, and they build about a 3-foot diameter nest, either on water's edge or in shallow water. These birds like water because the shallow water is sort of part of their warning system. If a predator is trying to come over land, it's going to make noise. So that's why they like to be near water. You can see well, maybe you can, maybe you can't. There are 2 eggs in that nest. They typically lay 2 eggs. Incubation starts as soon as the first egg is laid and ends after the second egg hatches, assuming it does. Incubation duties are shared by the parents during the day, and then at night, mom is mostly the one who's on the nest. Now, you ready for cute?
I like that.
Isn't that cute? I got a toy one too. 58 years old and I got toys. So yeah, these are precocial, meaning that within a day of hatching, they're just like the chickens in the barnyard. They got fuzzy down and they can walk around and they can leave the nest. They do not stay in the nest more than 24 hours. If the second bird hatches as well, which will be about a day or 2 later, what will happen is each colt will be cared for by one parent. Sort of a man-to-man defense here. The family group stays together, but one parent is in charge of one colt, one is in charge of the other. Now, survival rates, as it is in nature with baby things, is not great. It is very rare for both colts to make it to fledging. All right. Usually only 2 eggs. Yeah. And only about 1/3 of all colts make it back from migration after the first year. I mean, there's a lot of things: starvation, predation, accidents, not enough food, illness, whatever. But they are darn cute, aren't they? And they are a nice, fuzzy, rusty color. Now they grow fast. This baby's got 4 candles there for the 4 months of age or 4 weeks of age that it is. All right, so even at 4 weeks of age, look how long those legs are compared to mom and dad. By the time they reach 40 days, those legs are almost the same length as mom and dad. At 60 days, the bills are almost adult length and the wings are almost adult length. So these guys are growing fast. Now, while these babies are going through a lot of changes, So are mom and dad. So if you take a look at this picture here on the right, we see this nice fine gray plumage we talked about earlier that we see on Sandhill Cranes. But over here, they're a rusty color. They did not molt and grow new colored feathers. What happens is just before a mated pair settles down to nest, they paint their feathers a rusty color for camouflage. So they'll pick up rotting vegetation or mud and rub it all over their feathers. You can see it's not on their head. Can't reach your own head, right? And I guess they don't do each other's hair. So that's how they have that rusty color. As soon as the eggs hatch, they start a molt. It's a very gradual molt. Over from May through November, they'll molt a few feathers, grow a few new feathers in. So here's a picture taken from my friend Keith. This is through a window at the bird feeding station at Locagan Inn.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the last 5 or 6 years, the cranes have come up right close. It's been wonderful to watch families and children learn about these birds and be awestruck. So this is late September. Look how much the plumage has molted and grown in. It's not done, but it's a very mottled look. So if you see rusty color, you know they at least tried to nest. And if you see the mottled look, that's because they're now switching back. Okay, so this is 10 weeks of age. They are pretty much ready to fly. All right, ready to fledge. Fledging means they can fly. They're not going to be leaving the parents for a while yet. I mentioned that chirping noise, their voices don't change until they're about a year old. So even as they're migrating back in the spring, you can listen for that chirping noise. You may hear it. And then there's the fall migration. So back to talking about the staging areas. Our greater sandhills, in this area are coming south in easy stages and starting to collect a lot of them at Jasper Pulaski Fish and Wildlife Area in northwestern Indiana. I Googled it, 2 hours from here, or 2 hours and 7 minutes or something like that. And so over the course of the fall, October, November, December, more and more birds come to this area. So here's what happens there. The wildlife area itself has maintained a very open field, all right? And there's a viewing platform, a raised viewing platform for viewers. And what happens is the birds will be out in the daytime, out foraging. They're eating a lot of waste grain, fattening up for their migration. And then as the sun begins to set, the day begins to end, they come back to this open field. So as you stand on this platform, you can see literally small, medium-sized flocks of cranes materializing out of the horizon, noisily, of course, and coming in and landing. And they have this great way of landing, like parachutes with dangly legs, and landing on this field, and then having a talk and having a dance and making a general ruckus of it. It's kind of like cocktail hour without the booze. And it's wonderful. They come in and depending how late in the season you are, that will influence how many birds you see. Then I'll share those numbers with you in a second. Then after the sun sets, birds are not going to stay there overnight. They want to roost in a wetland where they feel safe. So then in groups of several thousand at a time, and very noisily, they'll take off and fly and land in a wetland a little bit distant. It's really cool. I have never been in there in the morning when they leave. I'm just not that early of a riser, if I guess, generally. I had to try it. So if you want to go to Jasper Pulaski to see this, you're going to want to go in the fall, and you're going to want to be there prior to sunset. Now, here are the numbers for the last 2 years. They careful track numbers. You can see early October, both years, it was like 3,700 birds. But as you get later into the season, you get larger numbers. So around Thanksgiving last year, 28,000 birds. Year before, 25,000. Mid-December, 16,000, 15,000. Look at this, November had 30,000. Now, typically, like the first time I was ever there, it was late 90s, 33,000 birds were there. And then December 1st, because I kept track on the website, they all took off. All right, now you can see more are lingering. But yeah, you can watch this website, see the count. They count like once a week, and take a look for yourself. It's pretty cool. I love this pandemic gets everything, right? Last December, cranes present, but we couldn't count because we didn't have enough staff. So, okay. I do have, if you want to come see me afterward, I do have a brochure describing Jasper, Pulaski, and where it is. But basically, look at this map. Here's South Bend, here's Fort Wayne, over there. So. And it said that this is a remnant land from the old Grand Kankakee Marsh, which would be a whole other program. Okay, so in addition to talking, which they do a lot of, because they are noisy, they have other ways of communicating too. This red patch on their head is another way they communicate. So here, this is a relaxed crane. It's chill. You can see the patch just comes back above the eye. I love the little heart shape. But if they get agitated or excited, it'll come back. So you see how now it's drawn back on the head? And this one is really mad. And then what the birds will do, it's like, look how mad I am. They'll put their head down and say, look at that. This is my warning to you. You're bugging me or whatever it is. All right, I actually have here a Sandhill Crane display dictionary. There was a couple that lived near cranes for a long time. And this describes head patches. It describes different head postures. It describes different dance moves. It's pretty neat. I got this off the internet and it wasn't that funny if you're interested in it. But another way they communicate famously is through dance. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of body language. This literally says, I'm leaving. They'll just start walking like this. And if you walk like and then and then they're going to go. Okay. So then another one, this is kind of a fun one. It's called the ground stab. And it's like, hey, let's dance. And so that might precede a bunch of other dance moves. One is just jumping and playing and just they'll pick up things and throw it. It's really fun to watch. There's another one. It reminds me of ballroom dance. Well, the male will hold up his wings and start to circle her, and then she'll hold up her wings and start to circle. And then he might also, they'll just kind of run in an arc and all sorts of things. So if you go to Jasper, Pulaski and you got your binoculars or your scope trained, you can look for some of those behaviors. Of course, cranes hang out in crowds. They can get irritated. So this is get away from me. All right. And if they're really provoked, they will attack with their bills and their feet. I would want to be there for that. They'll do that with other cranes. They'll do it with ducks, anything they want to get away. Okay. So these are big birds, bigger, 10, 14-pound bird, migrating. It's going to take a lot of energy to get all that weight down to where you need to go. Thankfully, Mother Nature has a solution. Sandhill cranes will ride the thermals. So basically what happens is, sunny day, he hits the ground, and then the thermal column of energy will start to rise. This usually shows a circle. Graphic one. Anyway, so the energy will start to rise in a circle, in a spiral, upward, and the cranes will take a ride on that. That is why you will see cranes and other large birds like American white pelicans and turkey vultures circling. They're riding those thermals. That way they can let physics take them aloft and not their own body energy. When they get high enough, or as the air starts to cool, they will then glide, find another thermal, and do the same thing. And that is how they migrate. And that is why you sometimes see them up there, looking lazy. They're kind of being lazy, but they can average 40 miles an hour. They might stay on the wing 9.5 hours nonstop. That's not lazy. Me, I would have to stop to pee or something. But they keep going. And they can travel up to 360 miles in one day. So yeah, it's pretty. Wouldn't it be great to be able to ride? Me, I'm going to Tennessee today. So that's how they travel. Now in the spring, our Sandhill Cranes pretty much just come north. They're going to come north in smaller flocks, larger flocks. They kind of straddle in. Should be seeing and hearing them any time. And then our graders might go as far north as this. So where's their Sandhill cranes have a very different story. So there's over 700,000 of them, and they're all concentrated in this area during the winter. Some of them have to go this far up. Some of them actually end up in Siberia. Some of them have to go very far. And so what happens with these birds is they funnel through this area in Nebraska, the Platte River region. They're Kearney, Nebraska. Traditionally, the Platte River, actually the pioneers said it was too thick to drink and too thin to plow. It's very shallow and very wide, but it's perfect habitat for roosting Sandhill cranes. So the birds come through here, they'll overnight in the river and then go out into, now it's all farms. There's plenty of waste grain for them to fatten up on. Back when it was prairie, they would forage in the prairie. Then at night, they come back to the river to roost. They might spend 2-3 weeks there, fattening up before they continue their journey. Now, when you have over 700,000 birds funneling through an area 70 miles long, it's a spectacular sight. And I finally went to see it last year. Yeah. So at night, you can have, tens of thousands of birds roosting on this river. So I'm going to share it with you. Unfortunately, I can't make the sound. So afterward, if you want to, I don't know, it was tremendously loud. So, but basically what happened was I did get up early this day. Before dawn, while it was still pitch black outside, I found myself in a bird blind. I was so excited because there were limited space. I got one. A bird blind at March 30th along the Platte River in Nebraska. And as the light started to rise, I started to detect shapes in the river. Sometimes it was sandbar, but as it got lighter out, I realized some of them were tightly packed Sandhill Cranes. So then when it gets light enough, the birds take off. I wish I could play the sound for you loud enough. Come up later if you want to play it on my computer with the speaker. But I was not prepared for what I saw.
Holy cow.
Oh my gosh. I mean, at any given time, there could be 400,000 birds on that 70-mile stretch. So this is awesome. Are they going north? They're probably just heading out today to forage. If the ones, there were a few that hung back, and it was believed that they were waiting for it to get warm enough for them to take the service to go north. Most of these birds will be back that night because they're going out to forage for food. So yeah, if you ever get a chance, I really recommend it. I was really glad I was in a bird blind because I was staring up with my jaw open. With all those birds overhead, it would have been a problem otherwise.
Did you get to go back at night?
I did. I saw them come back at night, which is also a really neat spectacle. But what I didn't realize is that these birds would leave in the morning all at once. That's what was just so stunning to me. Yeah. So that really helped me understand how it is that some indigenous lore credits the Sandhill Crane for carrying the season. They are a sign of spring, certainly for me, and they seem to travel with the season. So I want to share with you a story from the Assiniboine people. The Assiniboine, at the height of their power, basically had lands from south of the Saskatchewan River and north of the Missouri. So they were in Montana and North Dakota and a bit of the Canadian areas just north of that. This story was actually collected during the Depression. It was part of one of the New Deal programs called the Federal Writers Project, where people like librarians, history teachers, professors, writers, people who couldn't go out and haul stones like the CCC guys, were sent out to go out and collect lore from various ethnic groups in the United States, descendants of slaves or various cultural groups. There happened to have been a man that the Assiniboine called First Boy. The rest of us would call James Long. He is Assiniboine, or was. He lived among the Assiniboine, and he collected the tales of his people, some of which their lineage of these tales predate Lewis and Clark by a lot. So this is the one he claimed. I'm going to tell you. It's called "How the Summer Season Came," because long ago, in the land of the Assiniboine, they had only one season: winter. The ground was always covered with snow. The water was perpetually frozen, and the air was always cold. One day, a warrior party returned from a long journey, and they demanded right away to see the chief. They were really excited about something. They told the chief that they had been in lands that the Assiniboine did not own, but had this really wonderful thing called summer. It was kept in a lodge painted yellow, suspended from a tripod in a buffalo stomach, and it was consisted of spring water. And those that have the summer enjoy a ground and trees that are green and growing. They enjoy flowing water, and when the sun hits their skin, it's marvelously warm. Well, the chief grew wide-eyed and said, "We got to get this for us." And the warriors agreed, but they said, "We have a problem. The people who have summer also have horses. We do not. How are we going to be able to take summer from them and get away fast enough without being caught and killed?" Well, the chief was very wise. He knew the animals would want summer too. So he called a council with the warriors and some of the swiftest animals: fox, lynx, pronghorn antelope, coyote, and wolf. It did not take long for Chief to convince these animals to be on board with the plan to steal summer for the land of the Assiniboine. So it didn't take long before the animals and the warriors took a journey of several very long days, presumably south, to the land of the summer. And from a distance, they looked through and they saw the village. They saw the hut that was painted yellow. And they decided that their plan would be that just before daybreak, Lynx would sneak into the lodge because his feet don't make any noise. He would steal the summer, tiptoe out slowly, and when he reached the edge of the village, he would give the summer to Fox, who would run swiftly at great distance until his legs tired and he met up with Pronghorn. Pronghorn then would take it, and she would hand it off to Coyote. Coyote would take it all the way up to where Wolf was, which was going to be up in the snowy area by then. And then Wolf would run the summer across the snow, over the frozen river, and into the land of the Assiniboine. That was the plan. So the next morning, Lynx went in with his quiet feet, took the summer, and started to walk out of the village. Lynx noticed that wherever the spring water splashed out, immediately green things grew on the ground. And Lynx thought, "Oh, this is wonderful." So as soon as he got to Fox, Fox grabbed it, ran with all his might, and ran and ran and ran. It didn't take terribly long as Fox got distance for the people in the village to notice summer was disappearing. So they quickly got on their horses, followed the fresh growth, and followed Fox. Fortunately, Fox had enough of a head start that by the time he was wearing out and got to Pronghorn, the horses had not caught up to him yet. But Pronghorn knew they were on their way, so Pronghorn took off, ran on her legs as fast as she could, ran, got to Coyote. As she handed off the summer to Coyote, they could start to hear the horses in the distance. Coyote took off as fast as Coyote could. By the time Coyote got to Wolf, we were starting to see frost on the ground, getting back up to the land of the Assiniboine, and the horses are nearing. And Wolf thought, "Boy, do I have a problem. I've got to outrun these horses on snow. I don't know if I can do it." But Wolf gave it a big old try. And as Wolf ran and got into the snowy lands, Wolf noticed that because he had summer with him, it still melted before him. And even though it was snowy on the sides, he could run on fresh ground. And when he got to the river, it was still frozen. But even as he crossed the river, he could feel it softening beneath his feet. And when he got to the other side and turned around, the river had melted into a raging torrent. Wolf was on this side with the summer. The horsemen were on that side, and they couldn't come. The horsemen pleaded, please, we'll share summer with you, please. And I gotta give the Assiniboine credit, they agreed. I might have kept summer for myself, but they agreed. And so for the next several years, horsemen would come at the allotted time and either bring summer to the Assiniboine or take it back. The problem was the seasons changed awfully fast. Here you are in summer and then boom, suddenly you have winter. Or vice versa, you're in winter and then boom, suddenly you have summer. And the chief thought about it a while. He said it would be so nice if we could make this a gradual change, not so shocking. So he talked to the cranes. Cranes move in easy stages as they migrate. They'll migrate away, wait a bit, fatten up, migrate a bit, wait and fatten up. And the cranes agreed that they would be the ones that carried the summer. So as the cranes were bringing summer from the other people up to the Assiniboine knew that they were on their way because snow would start to melt and things would gradually start to green up. And the faster it happened, the closer they knew the cranes were. Same thing in fall. As the cranes were taking the summer away, things would change gradually. Things would cool gradually. The world would change gradually. And so that is how it has been ever since. The cranes bring the seasons in a nice gradual fashion so that not only do the Assiniboine have summer, but they also have 4 seasons, including spring and fall. And that's how it has been ever since. My tale told, does anyone have any questions about anything I said or didn't say? Yes.
When the cranes are coming back to the north, do they recongregate